This is a tough topic to talk about. And honestly, it's one that I don't entirely understand about because I feel I've sidestepped it. But a lot of people in the United States and other English-speaking countries are talking today about wokeness. There's a lot of different definitions of it, but today, whatever yours is, I'm going to tell you how I believe you can escape it. And I want to make this talk more about facts and not about fear. I am politically homeless in the United States. I'm sure there's some things that I'm like, that's pretty crazy. And there's some things where I'm like, come on, like who cares? I'm not going to tell you what you should think. At Nomad Capitalist, we've helped clients, everyone who's thought, hey, Roe v. Wade being overturned is crazy, I don't like that, all the way to folks who are much more on the right wing of the aisle. Our mantra is go where you're treated best. And so I want to talk about solutions for if you're concerned about wokeness, what you can do about it. Forget everything you know about the left wing, the right wing. That's not what this is about. Now, I have spent the last decade living outside of the United States. I've spent the last 15 years exploring, almost 16 years, exploring options in other countries. And for me, culture is the biggest thing that I've seen in all those years that impacts societies. Culture is something that may ebb and flow, but once it goes in a certain direction, it continues in that direction until some sort of explosive event. In the same way that perhaps an alcoholic has to hit rock bottom in many cases to stop drinking. You don't just see, especially in large societies, culture turn on a dime. And so culture in a country like the United States, and I would say we can put most of the English-speaking world in that same basket, has been becoming more and more progressive. You can think that's good, you can think that that's bad, but what I can tell you from having traveled to over 100 countries, having lived in, let's say, a dozen of them, is that the simplest way to avoid wokeness or any other issues that affect the social fabric where you live is very simple. It's to move. Now, hear me out. I'm sure a lot of people right now are typing that that's ridiculous. I'm going to stay and die for my country. It's my country. I'm not leaving. But wait a second. All the people that you disagree with, it's their country too. And the difference is, perhaps they're winning. Perhaps the country's becoming more and more the way they want it, and that's becoming more and more acceptable. I'm not going to go through all the different studies that say what percentage of people accept what kind of thing, but I'll tell you for me on the economic side, we've shown how in countries like Canada, a majority, and in some cases a vast majority of people say, yeah, socialism is a good idea. We just shared recently how 30% of Gen Z in the US says, let's have surveillance cameras inside your house for your safety. That's the way the culture is going. The issue for me is that culture the same everywhere? I recently had a friend of mine from Switzerland come and visit me. And I asked him, I said, do you think Switzerland is woke? He said, yeah, listen, again, everyone has their own definition. But he says, for the thing that I see Americans complaining about, he says, we probably have a little bit of that. But it says, it really seems to me like an American thing. He's like, every time I watch a video, I can tell who the Americans are in the comments by the way they respond. And he says, beyond that, probably an English-speaking country thing. So US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, those are the big ones. Here's a guy living in a very wealthy country, working in a very highly paid job. And he says, you know, I just don't really see much of what they're talking about in my country. Now, let's extend that out further to places where, for example, Nomad Capitalist has offices. We have people working in Belgrade, Serbia, Tbilisi, Georgia, Yerevan, Armenia. Let me tell you, if Switzerland is just a little bit of what's going on in the US, go to Belgrade. It's like infinitesimal. There are countries where it's perhaps too far the other direction, where I've sat and said, is she going to speak up? Is she just really going to wait for her husband to do everything? Is that the culture here? It's a little uncomfortable. The woman doesn't feel comfortable speaking up. This is too much for me. I've really seen all sides of the coin. And my thought is, you're not going to change the culture in your country. Culture creates the politicians that people vote for, which enact policies. But culture also just is a zeitgeist that affects public mood and eventually gets turned into policy. But if you feel like you're on the wrong side of that, you can sit where you're living and you can be angry and you can fight. And I think there are some people who enjoy that. I worked in or adjacent to the talk radio industry when I had a broadcasting business many years ago. And I would go to some of these talk radio functions. I'd meet Laura Ingraham, I'd meet Dennis Miller, I'd meet Bill O'Reilly, et al. And I'd say to myself, some of the people in this audience, I think, just like to complain. Some of the people who listen to talk radio, some of the people who consume this media diet of our country's going to pot, they just want to complain. That is not what we are talking about. But what I've seen living overseas is you don't have to live in a constantly divided culture. I don't. To the extent that the places where I live, and I have homes around the world, they have their challenges. I do not think the social fabric in those places has ripped, as you might say, as much as it has in much of the Western world. I don't really see people at each other's throats. And to the extent that perhaps to some much lesser level they are, I am the foreigner who's living there, who kind of escapes the stuff that only the true locals really know. And so I've been able to escape that. I've been able to associate with worldly people. I've been able to hire employees in my company who I think generally have less of an entitlement mindset than you would find in the West. I have even, and this has been discussed before, become more masculine. Perhaps not in the Americanized way where it's like, why aren't you punching people out, brah? Why aren't you lifting? But in a true way of being a leader, commanding a tribe, taking charge, taking care of people. I've become more of that because the places where I've lived, that's what women expect. Most of the places I've lived, there is, it's interesting. There are countries in Europe where you have what I would call very true feminism. I met a German woman once, and she's like, why are you trying to pay? Like, I'm also going to pay. Why are you walking me home? Like, I'm an adult, I can be walked home. They don't even, in some cultures, even chivalry is not so much of a thing. You can also get the exact opposite of that, where it's like, I'm the woman, I'm going to be the woman, you're going to pay for drinks, and I'm going to act like a woman. And so there's a whole spectrum that you can choose from. What I have found in meeting people, particularly in Eastern Europe, to a lesser extent in Latin America and Asia, there's a much greater level of maturity. In the West, they talk about how strong times build weak men, build weak people. And then weak people create bad times. And the cycle continues until you find strong people to rise up. I think a lot of people in the West are fantasizing that strong people are going to rise up in their country and somehow change things when nothing has really hit rock bottom. And then again, they say, oh, everyone's with me. But wait a second, we just heard like a majority of people in many Western countries want socialism. A majority of them, I really think if you are talking about this topic, they don't agree with you. The trend is not your friend. And I'm not saying that means you're wrong, but sitting there and saying, no, there's a silent majority, is not going to change anything. But what I've observed, coming from a country where people are a bit weaker, are a bit softer, and by the way, I'm not into this kind of toxic stuff where, again, people should be going and beating people or whatever. I don't even know what some people in the U.S. think masculinity is. I think it's, again, building a tribe. But talk about Eastern Europe. You put a 23-year-old in Eastern Europe up against a 23-year-old in the United States. The difference is night and day. And so over the years, I've had my parents, for example, meet a couple of women that I was seeing, and they're like, oh my God, how old are you? You're 23 years old. And they're like, we know someone from wherever that like you would be like a 35-year-old in the US. The 23-year-olds are like children where we live. And so if you want to be around people who are more worldly, are more educated, know what's going on, have matured, then you probably don't want to live in most English-speaking Western countries. We have hired people because we run a business at Nomad Capitalist where I was just talking to our operations manager today. He said a lot of our positions, they don't exist anywhere else. We have a unique product where we are the general contractor, the architect and the general contractor for someone who wants to move overseas. And we'll sometimes connect you with 9 different lawyers and accountants and bankers that you need to facilitate a move overseas. It's not just call one person and it's done. And so most companies don't do that. You normally have to call 8 or 9 different people. We decided to put it all under one roof. And the bottom line is we can't just go out and hire people from other companies who know our system because we created the system. And so we tended to hire people who graduated from good schools with good degrees. So if you're in customer service, helping clients implement, getting their second passport, you might have an international relations degree. Not easy to make a lot of money with that, but you have a very specific education that is worldly and kind of helps that process. And so we've had 22 and 23-year-olds. Listen, some of them don't work out, but we've had some of those who are better than 45-year-olds who come with six-figure salaries in the West. Now, you could say that about anything, but I will tell you, if I had a lot of time and patience to build a business, I would find young people with that profile in not every Eastern European country, but I know of Eastern European countries where there's a greater work ethic. There's some sense of deference in some cases. People want to work. There's an intelligence that I don't think is necessarily there in people who spent 4 years in college doing Jello shots. And then, by the way, if you want men to be men and women to be women, I mean, what I like about, for example, the Balkans or the Caucasus in Eastern Europe is you'll see a muscular Montenegrin taxi driver who is listening to like whatever the Montenegrin version of Selena is, and he's just totally cool with that. That to me is masculinity. He's just totally confident in, here's my role in society. I'm with someone who's equal, but we have complementary strengths, and we are together. And so I really think that you can find what it is that the society that you wish existed somewhere else. I don't think you're going to change your society. Now, if you're living in the United States, for example, can you move to somewhere where people are of like mind? Sure. And for some people, that's not a bad idea. But do understand, you still live in a system where the federal government has a lot of power. I think that you're seeing people moving from blue states to red states, and you're going to see more states become competitive. I lived in Arizona. It is entirely a blue state. You can argue. People argue in the comments, no, we're still red. You're not. Democratic governor, 2 Democratic senators, like mostly Democratic representatives, voted for Biden. It's a blue state. Yes, I lived in Arizona. It feels like a red state, but it's not a red state anymore. And so, how long before the place where, you live, the national culture kind of overtakes that? Again, I'm not taking sides here. And I'm sure that some of us could disagree on what we think is reasonable in a culture and some of us and what's not. But find a place where that culture exists. That's one thing we help our clients do. We don't consider ourselves to be culture warriors here, but we ask questions about what kind of society do you want to live in? And we've helped our clients move to 31 different tax-friendly countries and a couple of not-so-tax-friendly countries. We've helped them get passports in 28 different countries, open bank accounts in close to 50. We understand all the different options. And so someone who says, I'm looking for this kind of place to live, would have a different place to go from someone who wants a different kind of place to live. If this is all new to you, I would encourage you to spend 4 days with us at a live event we're hosting called Nomad Capitalist Live. And it's in a country that I believe is one of the most welcoming countries in the world, that a lot of Americans and Westerners probably wouldn't give a look at if we didn't talk about it. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia is the host of this year's Nomad Capitalist Live. It is 4 days of off-the-charts knowledge of asset protection, second citizenship, tax planning, all the stuff you want to live a global citizen lifestyle. If you're saying to yourself, you know what, I don't want to fight a losing battle. Whatever that losing battle is where I live, I'm just going to go where I'm treated best. And you know what you get when you do that? You're happy. For some people, that's probably the worst thing that could happen to them. But if you'd like to be happy, if you'd like to feel at peace and connected with the place where you live, if you want to open your back door and just let your kids go out and run in the backyard again, which isn't really the case in a lot of Western big cities now. You can't just open the door. Don't you go to prison for doing that some places? If you want to, go back to, if you want to create a way of life that works for you, you can do that with geography. And if you want to learn about that and you're not entirely sure where to start, Nomad Capitalist Live, coming up in Kuala Lumpur. Malaysia, one of the most welcoming, one of the most multicultural, very affordable place. Yes, it is a Muslim country. If you're not Muslim, there's a little bit of decorum expected, but they're not going to judge you. And it's a place that I've recommended for a decade. I'm hosting our live event this year so you can come and experience it. But more importantly, if you're saying to yourself, maybe there's a geographical solution to the frustrations I'm having, this could be a good place to start. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/live, and we'd love to share all the details about the event with you. Regardless of how you proceed, whether you come to the live event, whether you just want our help in putting together a whole holistic plan, or whether you want to just go and stay put and ride it out, I believe there's a geographical solution to every frustration you have. And cultures do not turn on a dime. Consider go where you're treated best.